Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome. We're glad that you're here. I'm Alyssa DeFilippo from Parents Helping Parents. And this evening's event is how executive functioning skills affect student success. And our presenter is Sarah Firestein or Firestein?
Firestein. Welcome.
Firestein, Sarah Firestein. Thank you. Sarah is a senior learning specialist and a program for education and enrichment of relational skills. That acronym is PEERS. Facilitator at Landmark College's Bay Area Success Center in San Mateo. The Success Center provides neurodiverse teens, young adults, and adults with access to resources and support for success in their executive functioning, academic, and social skills developmental journey. Sarah has more than 22 years of experience in the fields of social sciences and education and believes that success means students and families feel seen and heard with an individually curated set of supports. She considers herself a curiosity-driven thought partner and primarily uses a non-directive coaching approach that is aligned with Landmark College's evidence-based practices. So, thank you for coming. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, and we appreciate everyone being here.
Thank you, Alyssa. I'm going to also bring up my screen that I want to share and welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. My slide. I want to just make sure everyone's aware of kind of the flow for tonight and the objectives. I will go over an overview of executive function, and I'll highlight some of the skills related to that so everyone's clear on what we mean when we're referencing executive function. I put together some tips for folks that are here tonight in the event that you want to take on and support the development of executive function skills, or maybe add to that if you've already begun this process. And then throughout the presentation, there's a couple places that I've linked in resources, as well as I have a page that I'll go over and share with folks that are just some resources that are opportunities if you want a jumping off point to continue doing some more learning about executive function, getting some more inspiration about ways to support these skills beyond, of course, what Connections California already offers in their e-learning. What I'd like to start us off with is I'd like to invite folks, if they would, to take a moment and put an answer or some thoughts in the chat to this question. What are some of the attributes that contribute to an individual's progress in life? Or in other words, is there skills that help us be successful? Alyssa, if you wouldn't mind, if there's stuff that you're noticing coming in the chat or in the Q&A and you just want to share them out, that would be great. I'm going to give it about 10, 15 seconds and then I'll move forward. Thank you for those folks that are taking a moment to put some thoughts in the chat. We appreciate that.
Yeah, we have attention.
Yeah, absolutely.
Organization.
Right.
Being organized.
Yeah, that's going to make a big, significant impact on progress and success.
Planning.
Right. Great. So we've got an informed group with us tonight. Wonderful.
Goals and visions of what you want to do.
Wow, wonderful. I love that. I love how goals and then the visions came right after, right? Because that so goes nicely hand in hand.
Independence and in-person support from family members, community members, and financial resources. Wow.
Right. Knowing our stakeholders, having a team, right? We're not an island. We're not on our own. Even though my first sort of suggestion here is where we can, trying to have the ability to do things independently to the extent it's possible, right? Even if that means a portion of a particular aspect of something that we want to take care of. I also, I didn't hear it necessarily in the share, but we want to be able to be up for and ready to face problems and questions and mistakes and not get, sidetracked by failures, right? Problem solving is a big part of our ability to just continue, making progress in life. We already heard from the chat, someone already thought about goals and visioning. So that's definitely something that is a big attribute to progress and success. I think the other piece that's really important is this next one, having that critical thinking, having the ability to take perspective and see things from different points of view, and also prioritizing, which can be a really important thing to help us be able to do a lot of these things, to decide what we want to try to do first or learn how to do independently, let's say. And the last two, not that your list has been helpful, but I just want to go to the last two, which, right, some of the other attributes are just how are we managing, our behavior, our emotion, our internal world, along with our attention, which someone also said. And then, of course, time management, that good old budgeting of time. So all of these attributes, right, they all do contribute to growth and progress. And we've already listed them. Those are all elements that are going to kind of fit into this idea of when we talk about having executive function or having these skills. So, I'm going to define executive function in two main ways. First, starting with this one, I like it's kind of very to the point, right? It's executive function is basically how the steps in our brain do all the things to manage the incoming and outgoing information, making decisions, having a plan. I also really like Dr. Meltzler's definition, which is just, again, talking about, executive function is that, multiple types of cognitive, abilities, the mental processes here, she says, that are working together, right? They're helping us to manage our thoughts, our actions, and our emotions. And I think that that together piece is really important because a lot of times when we talk about executive function, and we will highlight, like I said, some of the skills, sometimes we think about them in isolation. And they're all important to understand and have ideas of how to incorporate them, but they also work very much, together. So the next thing I want us to think about is just, and some of us may have already heard this, we're familiar with executive function, is a common analogy that our executive function is like a conductor of a symphony or an orchestra, right? It's the part of our brain that is commanding an entire group. It's cueing, it's bringing people in, it's getting all the musicians in the orchestra to do their particular role to make a beautiful composition of music come alive. And so again, this slide is just to kind of build off of the last one, which is we want to understand that there's all these things that make up executive function, these skills that make us be able to have goal-directed behavior. And even though they're independent, they all work in coordination. These are the 10 executive function skills I'm going to highlight this evening. However, for folks that are coming in tonight that are familiar, or folks that this is the first time you're hearing about executive function, you're going to go into some rabbit hole research. There are some folks that you're going to see in the research and on the internet that kind of essentialize the skills to 5 things. There's other places you're going to see that there's sub skills that kind of go up to in the range of 30, 35, and sometimes more. And there's that many, different definitions of executive function. But I think these 10 are the ones that I just wanted everyone to be familiar with when you're hearing executive function. If you're, the school is bringing up those concerns, you have those concerns, or in the work world, if some of these things might be issues that you're seeing in a young person or in a person that's transitioning to the work world, I think these 10 really kind of encompass a really good understanding of all the skills that entail executive function, right? So do we have the ability to make a plan? Do we have a system of organization, right? Are we able to get ourselves to start, right? That isn't a skill of itself. Do we have a sense of time or, how much time to allot different tasks, or even where we're going to be most successful during the day to see through a plan that we've allotted time for? Self-control is that part about the self-monitoring and the self-awareness of kind of what we're needing, how we're feeling. Perseverance is a huge part. Can we sustain and keep going and deal with messy and in some cases non-linear success as we're trying to work towards getting things done, things that maybe we really want to do or things that we really have to do. Metacognition is a big piece that I'm going to talk a lot about and keep coming back to tonight, which is a big part of self-awareness and a big part of how we understand how we learn and how we do the things that we do. I think this is kind of a big underpinning of executive function. Of course, we also know that attention is a big piece. If we might have best laid plans, but if we really struggle to put our focus, put our attention in places, that can be challenging. You know, if we don't have the attention to see through a system of organization, you know, that can kind of backfire, which is where we get into some flexibility. Are we trying to do a certain organization system in a way that maybe isn't best suited to us? And do we, you know, using our metacognition, using that ability to kind of self-evaluate and reflect, can we be flexible to maybe try a different strategy or notice when a strategy is not serving us or recognize, you know, as we go through the different tasks of life at the different stages of life, you know, when certain tools and strategies serve us no longer, or maybe if there are certain task or environment specific type strategies or tools. Working memory is how much information can we hold in mind. I think I'm also going to talk a bit about working memory as well. I think of all these 10 and with the time we have tonight, the focus in particular, even though we know these are all coordinated work together, I'm going to kind of speak a bit to some of the things parents can do, parents and caregivers can do to support working memory, especially if you have an individual that really has trouble holding a lot in mind, holding a lot of information in mind. Maybe this is the individual that has never really been able to go beyond a one-step direction. A one-step direction might be challenging in and of itself, but being able to hold several steps of a problem. So we're going to talk a little bit about maybe some practical ways we can support that. And again, the metacognition, how can we help, you know, as parents and caregivers, really just try to develop that ability to think about our own thinking so that we can even be aware if any of these executive functions are strengths for us or areas that need some more support. So in terms of thinking about success in a classroom setting, right? If we think about some of those executive functions, and I'm not going to go through this whole slide, I wanted this here more for your reference, right? This is how some of these will look in a classroom. And so I'm going to skip down to time management, right? Because I think this is a big thing that might be an area to think about in your household. Is your individual, are they in the habit already of using alarms? Are they taking responsibility to get themselves up, to get to school, or to get to a day program, or a volunteer thing, or if they have responsibilities just in their day-to-day at home? Are they using alarms to just make a plan about a time to get up, and to be able to also, you know, manage the other obligations in the day to start their day correct? Again, you know that I'm going to be talking a bit throughout the evening about self-monitoring and metacognition. Can students make adjustments, for instance, you know, in the week if they keep, you know, getting up too late and missing the bus? And we're going to talk too about what is the role a parent can take in helping to develop metacognition. And in a moment, I'm going to explain why that's so critical. Last one I want to go to is at the very bottom, which is that, again, that flexible and adaptive thinking, right? We come up with plans all the time, and students have various plans. And what happens if, like in this instance, if students have forgotten a key material for the day? And can they strategize? Can they on the spot problem solve? Can they come up with an alternate way to still, you know, find access to the material or be resourceful? And all of these things, another thing you're going to hear me say tonight, and I'll emphasize again at the end, is all these things we can learn how to do, but we aren't born necessarily knowing how to do it. We need to be shown and explained and taught, and we'll go over a little bit more of some other things we can do when it comes to learning how to learn these skills in a school setting or in a home setting. If we have challenges in executive function, it could be that we're having trouble getting started with things. It could be that we really have trouble moving, from a reading assignment into another, subject in school, right? Or moving away from a project into a more procedural type thing, moving from class to class. We might have, and I'm going to move kind of to the bottom here, is we might have trouble just organizing our thoughts, and that's where we really get stuck in writing school. Or we might notice that some of the individuals in our life, it's that their environment is really, really disorganized. And so that just creates chaos. It's not even clear if there's an organizational internal process that's not working optimally for them, but outside environmentally, they don't have a lot to kind of help them stay grounded. So these are all some challenges that can be letting us know that there's executive function support and skill development that's needed. But we want to keep in mind kind of just reminders of those of us that aren't, constantly studying brain science, that the brain takes at least 2.5+ decades to develop. This is a side view of our brain, and the brain develops from the back to the front. And in the front of the brain is all the things that we refer to when we're talking about executive function. This is where our concentration, our ability to plan, our ability to put things in order. This is all happening in the very front of our brain, in the frontal lobe. And this is one of the very last areas to develop. So it's not uncommon that people might have executive function challenges because they, that might point to more that they have not yet learned those skills. It may be that the way their brain is developing is not at pace with their neurotypical peers. But I think in just the bigger context for parents and caregivers to keep in mind is that when I'm saying 2.5+ decades for the brain to fully develop and mature, that means that, in their mid to late 20s, that's when the brain is fully developed. And that means that all that time up to that point, EF can be at various points not always reliable or need a lot of attention and support. And we have developmental milestones, and I'm going to give you some information about kind of things to consider because, it may be that, as adults in our day-to-day and our busyness, we kind of sometimes forget, like, oh, how do you not already, know how to put your lunch together and make sure it gets in your backpack, right? Or you haven't, just slowed down to figure out what the procedure is to unload the dishwasher and put things away, or how to manage laundry. Like, those are things that, unless explicitly taught, we might not understand, or even understand kind of timing and when to do that, how to collaborate within a household. There's a lot of things that go into planning, being able to just be able to accomplish whatever it might be, small to major goals that, help us stay functional in our life. So because we started off with that earlier analogy of the conductor, I want us to keep in mind that things can be really seemingly chaotic. It can be really hard to understand, like, why can I not send my kid to my room and tell him to go get dressed? And when I go find where he is in his room, he's, naked with a sock in his hand and he's reading a book. Why is it that I can't just rely on, my young person or my teen or even my young adult to kind of follow through with what seems very basic, life skills? And in the case of this image, right? This is a group of musicians that do not have a conductor. They're all kind of working maybe at odds. Maybe they're making music together, maybe not. Looks like we have one person that's coming from like a marching band. So that's not even someone who's would be a part of our original analogy, the orchestra. So without, our executive function, without when that brain is fully developed and without some, coordination of all these different skills, we can just have people all working at odds and making a lot of noise. And then, a lot of confusion in our mind. I think the other piece is, most folks, right? We all know in our lives, they want to do well. They want to learn. They want to succeed. They want to have a good life. And, some individuals are just getting inundated with too much stuff, and they have not yet developed the skills. Their brain is not able to manage all the information that's coming in, and they get really overloaded. So I think what I want us to think about for, the rest of the evening is that as parents and caregivers, how can we, along with the teachers that hopefully we're working and collaborating with, to support our young people, how can we all act as substitute frontal lobes, right? As our young person's brain is taking the time it takes to naturally develop and grow, how can we, hold that for them, not necessarily doing everything for them, but helping them learn how to understand the different skills that they need to be successful. So here's just some initial recommendations. These are things that can be done by parents, but you can also have these conversations and check in with, different educators or different support staff that you're working with. And, are you or the teacher or other staff members, are you able to explicitly speak to and explain the different executive function skill areas? And in this presentation towards the end, I will link something to a wonderful website that has a lot of great stuff that's already done that you can even take or print off the web. There's a lot of free resources that this person has made available and has developed where it can help you do that explicit conversation around the different skill area. As a parent or caregiver, right? Are you modeling, or are you aware of other teachers or other adults in the life of your young person? Are they talking through, are they making their thinking visible about how they do what they do, right? How they budget for the household, let's say, how they create a grocery list. Can they model that? Do you make the list on paper? Do you do it on your phone? Is there some other system that you're using? Scaffolding is a big thing that maybe some of us are familiar with, right? That often is something we talk about and we look to for teachers to do and other staff. But we can also, as parent and caregivers, provide this in home, right? We can do things side by side. We can start homework together. We can start that particular, let's say we have a household chore together, right? Maybe we're still learning how to make our bed. We can start some of that together with them, or help think through the sequence. Again, talking through, planning through, basically doing that metacognitive work of talking through and helping to externalize and talk through what it is that the young person might need to do. And this really, this can start at a very young age. It doesn't have to be for teens or young adults. I think planting the seeds and continue to build it and ratchet it up based on kind of cognitive levels and the maturity levels is important, but this can start at a young age, this ability to scaffold and talk through steps. Creating visual reminders, right? This can happen in the home if it's not already happening. Use charts or calendars. We can, again, model lists if we're list makers. Not that all of these things will be what our young person uses, but just so they're aware that, hey, my mom or dad or my uncle, my cousin, hey, that's what they're using. Maybe I'm going to find something for myself. Maybe I'm going to use a similar type of calendar that my cousin uses. I think when creating visuals, right? We also want to embrace color, and color should have meaning. And symbols are really important as well. You don't just have to put in, doctor's appointment. There could be a symbol for a doctor's appointment or a toothbrush. If you're using a daily schedule or a visual schedule, toothbrush for when it's time to brush your teeth. Developing routines and consistency is a big thing. And I know in all of our lives, some of us, this comes very naturally, and some of us as adults struggle to create that in our own households. But this goes a long way for young people that, again, their executive function is not yet developed. It is developing, but these routines and consistency gives them a structure and a framework to learn off of and to derive a sense of stability. So daily routines can really be a powerful and impactful way to help, especially young folks, our preteens, our teens, even our young adults, some of who are still kind of young-minded, right, really have a sense of how to organize time, right, and having a sense of sequence to the day. And lastly, right, support emotional regulation. Everyone comes at this at different ways in terms of how familiar and how comfortable they are with their own emotional world, but this is something that, is helpful to try to work on, speaking and naming emotions and also naming stress. And tonight I'm not going to focus a ton on how to support that. I think there's a lot of great information out there. I just wanted to put that on folks' radar that this is a big important part of executive function. It's really easy, especially if we're that kid where we're getting overwhelmed and our funnel into the brain, we're on overload, that can come across as sometimes kids melting down or teens getting really irritated and frustrated or, appearing to be really resistant and giving up. So, the more that we can try to name some of the feelings, or if it's stress, the better. So the next two slides I'm going to give some examples that, could be used in more of an academic setting. I would say, for a lot of us, when we're a part of an IEP process, right, we get lists of accommodations or things that maybe we have a wish list. And I want to make a point between this slide and the next, which is, with executive function, especially if we struggle with kind of follow through and completing tasks, some of these strategies are really great, right? There are many apps out there to help with reminders, right? There are many ways to create like a daily written schedule. On the next slide, we'll talk about some examples. But as you see, a lot of this stuff is just stick to a routine, right? It's naming all the things that might support executive function. These are all helpful, but unless the person who's sharing the strategies with the young person or the individual can really explain, even model, even in the midst of trying to see if the young person can try some of these strategies, scaffold it, some of these will be just kind of go in one ear, out the other. And this sometimes happens, this can be a disconnection that happens also with school. There's a lot of great things in the IEP, but we're not really bringing the individual into the conversation about how this could look for them, how this works, not just telling them this is what you can do, but teaching them why we do it, this is how we do it, walking them through it, and so forth. So a different example might be, for instance, as I said earlier, with working memory, it can be hard to hold a lot of stuff in mind. And so if we need to break down the steps of a homework assignment or a long-term project, maybe a way that we organize our thoughts could be through a Kanban board. So one example, is that you could do this on a piece of paper, on a whiteboard. You could do this, on a poster board, on your wall. I've seen people do it in a lot of different ways, and this could be really helpful for some folks. They have 3 categories. They're taught kind of how to create the to-do list with the Post-its. Maybe the color of Post-its means a certain class, let's say, and as they're working through things, they're in a tactile way, moving one Post-it, through till they're done, so that they're visually and kind of in a way manipulating the tracking of an assignment. That could be really powerful for some people. if, you know, they're explained, taught, it's reinforced with a teacher or a parent. I'm gonna open up this link really quickly just to show something really simple, very stripped down, not overly complicated, that just gives some scaffolding of how to use this type of processing, just for examples for parents. All right, going back, and I see the time, so I'm gonna start kind of hustling through here so we have enough time for Q&A. So these 6 things are things I also wanted to highlight just directly for parents and caregivers, whereas the other slide, these are, you know, those were things you could do as a parent or caregiver, but you could also kind of check in and see if, like I said, the educators or other staff people in your life were doing those things. But here's what you can be doing. When I'm talking about reflexive questions, right? Those are just ways to help build that reflective and metacognitive ability that I mentioned. So what I've done here, and I'm not going to open it, is I've linked to a really great introductory YouTube. This really wonderful speech and language therapist that does a lot of work with executive function. She put together a really nice introductory slide with a lot of nice examples of questions, and it's under 5 minutes, so it's really worth a look. And again, the idea is you're planting those seeds to help engage your child to be thinking about their thinking about, okay, do I have a way that I prioritize when I have a bunch of assignments or I've fallen behind on assignments? Or, you know, do I have a way of keeping myself organized if I'm going to start working and managing school, or, you know, just managing kind of my communication around the work world, if that's the case. The others, you know, are important. We don't want to rush, and we don't want to solve our kids' problems as much as that is so hard not to kind of want to fix everything. We want to try to the best of our ability, partner with our young people, you know, age appropriate wise, to help them, you know, be a part of solving their own problems or understanding of this, right? There's different phases of the problem solving process. Even doing something just as simple as asking your child to wait. Hey, you know, I need to finish doing, you know, the vacuuming. So I'll be done in 15 minutes, but what can you do while I'm waiting, right? Just to kind of build up their ability to have some self-regulation around kind of if they get frustrated or impatient with waiting. It's, again, going back to just kind of doing things side by side, being able to do that modeling or scaffolding, help your child make plans at whatever age. That can be cooking together. That can be setting up a weekend plan and problem shooting. You know, if there's different time constraints, how you're going to manage that if different barriers come up. I put on here about setting goals, right? We said that at the very top, that's a huge part of making progress and success in life. I've linked here for those families that really are like tech savvy and like things like Alexa or Echo. There's a great extension you can use here where you can track goals by just, you know, doing voice command to that app that I've linked there. The other thing, and this might not be a big surprise to folks, is if you're in a household where you have maybe removed a lot of responsibilities from whatever age of your young person, let's put that back in. Let's add daily or weekly household responsibilities. There's a great amount of executive function skills that can be developed through chores. And there's even research that bears that out. So I put in like 3 categories, right? There could be self-care chores. It could be just things they're doing around their own bedroom or own space in the house, or their own, you know, certain things that are just for their own self-care. But then, you know, there's these other 2 categories depending on your household. Family care chores, you know, there could be cleaning responsibilities, setting the table. You know, if there's pets in the household, there could be aspects of the pet care. But this is a great area. If you have a young person that's not yet showing a lot of interest in sports or art or other types of activities that they might find ways to naturally practice some of the executive function skills because it's coming from something they're really motivated to do, the chores is another area to fall back on. And, you know, even though I'm sure it's a big headache and hassle for those of us in our households that have that chore wheel or have assignments like that, it is kind of teaching some of that, hey, there's going to be things, sometimes even on a daily basis, that we have to do that we don't want to do. And executive function, in terms of those skills, it's kind of almost like a muscle that you're building and you have to practice. So when we're doing chores, we have to pay attention. We have to, have a sense of what are the sequence of steps we have to do to get the task done. We might even have to do some switching between tasks. So there's a lot of different skills that might come up in chores. So I feel like that's an area sometimes that gets forgotten. I just wanted to emphasize that tonight. I think for sake of time, I'm going to just go quickly. I put this slide in. I wanted folks to just have the developmental timeline so they could have sort of a reference point of, okay, in these different developmental chunks, right? These are some things that are, supposed to be developing when it comes to our executive function, our skills. What I really like about what I've linked here, which I will open briefly, is if that other list on the slide is too vague to you, you can go into here, and this might be a really helpful place just to see, okay, when I think about, oh, maybe I want to do chores around the house, maybe I want to reinstitute that if that's not something I'm doing currently with my family members. This gives you a little bit of like a placeholder of like, okay, what's kind of appropriate, or what is something I can maybe expect or ask of my young person. And it kind of breaks it down into a couple different categories. This also is something to keep in mind if you have a young person that maybe is not at the same developmental milestones as the rest of their peers. Maybe, they're still working on stuff within the 5 to 7 year range, even if they're 15 or 16. And so if that's the case, what is the supports or scaffolding that needs? That gives a little bit of a window into maybe just where their brain development is, because we know, right, sometimes our developmental age is not commensurate with our actual biological age. All right, now I want to make sure I don't want to find my presentation again. If I can go back to it. All right, there it is. And I really want to, coming to an end, just want to end with this quote, because I think it's really powerful and it kind of speaks to the theme of what I believe about executive function, which is human beings are happier and more cooperative and productive and more likely to make positive changes in their behavior when those in positions of authority, right? Parents, caregivers, teachers, other adults in their life do things with them rather than to them or for them. And this takes a lot more effort and a lot more time, but it does have a lot to pay off on. As I said, these are the resources I put together along with the other things that were linked in the slide, which Melissa will make available to everyone. So I just gave some starting off points. If you're more of a book person or a webinar or podcast, again, Connections California has a great wealth of resources in their e-learning. I wanted to highlight 2 specific resources that I think go a long way. This top one is the one where, hey, if you want to try explicitly teaching executive function skills, this is the person that's put all those together based on the 10 that I highlighted tonight. And there's great stuff for ideas and strategies for teachers in the classroom, but also stuff for home, especially if you go into the interventions link. That's not for every single skill, but for most of them. And this particular person, the Pathways to Success, she's amazing. The website's great. And there's a lot of stuff if you're someone who, I don't want to do the metacognitive stuff, Sarah. I don't want to work on the questioning. That's not the way I want to relate the bond with my child. And I don't want to make them do chores. There's tons of games and different things that she suggests. So if you want to do a more playful way of addressing these skills, if that's more your parenting style, she has a lot of great stuff in that. And then Smart But Scattered. This is the Peg Dawson and Guar folks, and they have a lot of great resources, and a lot of great handbooks and all kinds of stuff for executive function. This is their page, their resources, and there's multiple things, not just print articles. Final thought, and then we'll take the remainder of the time for your questions or your comments, is just that, right, we are all born with the ability to have executive function skills, but it takes effort to master them, and it requires a lot of practice, and individuals need support, right? That's why if we do things for them, if we do things to them, if we make them use certain strategies or tools, that can really hinder their ability to develop executive function skills, right? That's why I believe more in trying to help them think about what they're aware of, what's working, what are they noticing other people are using, what are they open to trying? Because EF will improve and it will gradually develop, because we know the brain takes a long time, but it will come along as long as we don't, stand in the way of letting it develop. So I'm at the point of Q&A, and I think, Alyssa, you were gonna maybe field if there's any questions or comments that would be helpful to hear from folks.
Thank Sarah so much. As I said, so accessible, so understandable, and in such a short period of time, such a lot of information. And thanks again for those resources.